Hey guys, welcome to Corporates. In this video, we are going to learn bits and pieces about DBMS, and we are also going to have a look at this platform called db-fiddle.com, which we are going to use extensively in our upcoming tutorials. Without much ado, let's get started. So guys, if you are somebody who are already working in an analytics role, be it business analyst or a data analyst, or maybe related roles like a data engineer or a data scientist, then data is going to be your bread and butter, right? And hence, one of the very fundamental things we must understand about data is how is data stored, right? So historically, if we look at things, maybe pre-computer era, we know that the data was stored physically in say big files. There used to be a lot of paperwork that was involved to maintain records for different kind of applications, right? And at that point in time, say it took a lot of effort to first write those documents. Then, since they were physical copies, it needed certain space to to store that information, and also for the application where the data was needed for a longer period of time. Even there were constraints on the quality of the paper used and things like that, right? So it was one, time consuming to store, two, it needed space, and three, it had its own limitations, right? And when we talk about say fetching or reading that data that you've already stored, again one had to scroll through large documents to fetch the information that one is looking for, right? So that way it was a cumbersome task, and with the advent of computer, this became a lot easier as the information was stored electronically, and the kind of softwares or applications we use for storing information are called a database management system, right? All they do is they enable us to store data on our computers, right? Now, I mean, it still appears more like a black box for us, that okay, there's something called as a DBMS which would allow us to say store data, but then how is it actually done, right? So before we go on to the types of data, let's have a look at one of these spreadsheet that I have on Excel, right? So I think all must have worked with Microsoft Excel in one of in during our maybe school or college days, right? So we all have created tables like the ones I have for students and teachers. Just very basic simple table. I mean, four columns in students, which has their IDs, name, the class in which the student studies, and their score, right? So with a basic structure like this, having four columns, we can store information for as many students as we want, right? And this is one of the methods employed by what is called as relational database. They make use of tables to store information about things which has a structure to it, right? I mean, like we saw for students, that all students have an ID, they have a name, there is a particular class in which they study, and they all would attain a certain score in their exams, right? So in applications where the structure of information we want to store is quite static, right? So in those application, we use this kind of database, relational database, right? And it employs tables to store the data, essentially used for structured information, right? Yep, and the SQL that we are going to see is a relational database only. Interchangeably, these databases are called as SQL database, right? The next kind of database that we have is a non-relational database, wherein maybe the different entries. So, for example, here the information was stored for students, and the students' information were quite static. We were looking for IDs for each student, their class and their score. But if there are certain cases wherein the object for which you are storing the information, the kind of columns you need for them, they are not static. You want to have a say more freedom about how you want to store that information, then we go for a non-relational database, right? For example, if we are say maybe storing some inventory information, right? For example, if we are storing some information for sugar, right? So if you look at sugar as an object, so sugar would have say a weight associated with it, right? And maybe a rate associated with it, right? But if you look at say maybe any fluid item, say maybe milk, the way you measure it is in volume, right? So instead of putting its weight, you would maybe use volume, right? And then maybe if you would say, like in India, we sell bananas in North India are sold basis the number of count, right? So maybe here you would keep a count of the object, right? So here you cannot store the information of all these three objects in a table unless you define the quantity column basis certain criteria, right? So in applications like this, I think it would be a better solution to go for a say a non-relational database, right? So there we are not making use of tables, right? So it is essentially a key value pair, right? So for example, name, what you can do is Control Z, let's do it a few times, right? So you can maybe say name, you can put a rate, and in case of sugar you would put weight, in case of milk you would put volume, and in case of banana you would put count, right? So that is how you can make use of a non-relational database to store different information, right? So these are primarily the two types of databases we have. And just to clarify on the hierarchy on the relational part, so we are primarily going to focus on relational databases because SQL comes here and that's what we want to study, right? And having said that, I just want to draw out how the information is arranged. So we have on the top we have something called as a database, which is essentially a collection of tables, right? So a database would have tables, and a table would have rows and columns. All right. So like we saw in these tables, students and teachers. Right. The columns are essentially the vertical uh, differentiations that you see, right? And they are also called as fields, right? Columns, and the rows are different records that are put in this table, right? So they are rows, and I think that's primarily it for now, and we will see more of it as we'll progress, right? Any database that we have, it has four fundamental operations associated with it. So these are called CRUD operations, CRUD, if you go by the initials, right? The number one being we should be able to create a database and write entries into it. So that is what constitute the create operations. Then we have something called as a read operation in which you want to access the already stored information you have. Next up, we have update, wherein if you want to modify the already stored information, so you do update operations. And the last one is delete. When the information is no longer needed, you want to maybe utilize that space for some other information, so you would essentially delete the redundant information. So these are some of the operations that are associated with a DBMS. And since we are going to have an interview focus approach, we are primarily going to focus on the read operations. We will primarily read the data and manipulate it in our upcoming tutorials. So these are the two things that we are going to focus on, right? And yeah, so just to summarize, we are going to focus on relational database which store the information in the form of tables like the ones we see on our screen. Let me get rid of this part. Yeah, cool. So we are going to focus on relational databases with tables like this, and we are going to focus on read operations primarily, and we'll also do data manipulation on the fly as we will progress in this course, right? So this sums up the first part of our discussion. For the next part of our discussion, let me go to this platform called db-fiddle, right, and which can be accessed here, right. So guys, when you are going to write your queries, you can maybe make use of Excel spreadsheets to create your table, but if you want to query your data, either you need to set up SQL in your systems, which which you would primarily access through command prompt, which is not a very user friendly experience for the beginners. What we are going to use is going to use this db-fiddle.com. We are going to create our tables like the ones I've created here in Excel, and then we can simply copy paste this information in this platform. We can do text to DDL. So what we are going to do using this data, we are going to create our tables here. So I've copy pasted the students data from the Excel, and I've just pasted the data in formatted text section. In the table name, I've given the table name that I want to use, right? So then what we have to do is append to schema. So you would see it will automatically write some SQL commands to create this database, to create this table basically, not database, and it will insert the information that we have copy pasted from Excel, right? If you click run, it will create this table. Since we haven't written any query here as yet, we don't see any output, but for the sake of seeing an output, let's do a select, maybe a name from students. Yes, yep. Let's run this query. As you would see now, so we have written our SQL query to access the data that we had created, and here is the output for us, right? So I think this is a very simple way of testing our SQL skills by creating our own tables and just copy pasting them here and writing whatever queries we wanted to write. So I think this summarizes what all I had to discuss in this section, in this video. And that's a wrap for us today. Let's see each other in the next video. Thank you.